Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Dennis Brown. I want to thank you for joining me for another Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. For those of you that are catching this on replay, hit me up in the comments with hashtag replay. I love to hear from my replay folks. For those of you that are joining me live, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. This is a special Freight Broker Bootcamp Live episode. I have a guest that I'm going to be introducing momentarily. He's someone I've known for, probably a decade or more, over a decade now. As a former student of Freight Broker Bootcamp, has been a freight agent for a very long time, has done extremely well. And he's going to talk about today, he specializes in the produce niche. He's an expert when it comes to brokering freight inside the produce niche. And so I'm going to have him come on today, and he's going to share 10 tips that every freight broker needs to know about the produce niche. So the produce niche can be highly profitable if you do it right, but it's also can be very competitive, and there's a lot of nuances associated with the produce niche that don't always apply to other niches, right? So there's a lot of nuance there, and he's going to share a lot of that with you today. So welcome. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you so much for joining. Do me a huge favor and hit me up in the comments real quick with the city and state that you're logging in from. I'd love to hear from you. As you guys know, I'm in the Buffalo, New York area, and a lifelong resident here. Specifically, I live in Clarence, New York. Let me know where you're tuning in from. I'll try to do a quick shout out. Then we'll bring on the special guest. We'll do the training. So this is the agenda. We're going to do the training. Then we're going to do live Q&A at the end. So if you stick around to the end, we are going to do live Q&A. Okay, so stick around if you have questions, whether that be for my guest or whether that be for me or anything related to starting or growing a successful freight broker or freight agency business. Okay, so who do we got here? Who's in the house today? We've got Nextlinks from Valley Stream, New York. We got Rashawn from Kennesaw, Georgia. We got Atif from Dallas, Texas. Oprah from Charlotte, North Carolina. Neil from Frankfort, Kentucky. We've got Kelia Moore from Durham, North Carolina. We got Ozan from Lincoln, Nebraska. Holistic Logistics from Kennesaw, Georgia. Ryan from Las Vegas. Amani Glenn from Charleston, South Carolina. Russ 918 from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Jomo Mighty from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Michael Burns from Apollo. Let's see, where is it? What is it? Apollo, Pennsylvania. Upload pipe in Apollo, Pennsylvania. Nadine from Snellville, Georgia. MMB from Virginia. Coach Tony. Hey. Andreas from Saskatoon. How are you, Andreas? Haven't heard from you in a while. Tuckerman from Camden, South Carolina. Jack Rich from Cleveland, Ohio. Mercedes from Chicago, Illinois. Blessed Logistics from Hagerstown, Maryland. Coach Tony from Rose Pine, Louisiana. Rajinder from Williamsburg. Jasmine from Maryland. Eric Vall from Santa Clarita, California. Eric Francis from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Tariq from Rocky Mountain, North Carolina. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Truly appreciate you being here. Again, today I have a special guest, and he's going to share with you 10 tips that every freight broker needs to know about the produce niche. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's let a bunch of people get live here. And in about, let's say 30 seconds, I'm going to introduce my guest real quick, and then we'll bring him up. We're going to do the training again, and then we're going to do live Q&A at the end. So if you stick around to the end, we are going to do live Q&A. All right, so let me grab a quick drink before we go live, and then I'm going to introduce my friend and guest expert for today. All right, so today we are going to share with you 10 tips that freight brokers need to know about the produce niche. And while I've been a broker for many, many years, I had my brokerage since 2003, did over $200 million as a broker, I specifically never specialized in the produce niche. So I've invited a guest expert on today, someone that I trust, someone that I know, someone who's done extremely well in that niche. His name is Eloy Lozano, and he's been a guest on this Freight Broker Bootcamp Live before. He's been an agent. Okay, he's actually an agent, not his own brokerage, since 2010. He's done well over $10 million as a freight agent. Last year in 2021, he did over $1.8 million as an agent. And again, he specializes in the produce niche. So I'd like to welcome my friend and comrade, Eloy Lozano. Thank you so much for being here, my friend.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you.
So Eloy is from McAllen, Texas. So he's down right down near the border, right? So tell us a little bit. Give us a quick insight into your business, kind of how you got started. Take a minute, and then we'll jump into the training.
Well, basically, I got started. Most of my family were truck drivers. They would all haul produce out of the McAllen area. So that was the number one reason I got started doing this and being in the produce industry, because we're right across the border from Mexico. So most of the product that we move out of here is Mexican produce. So it was one of the things that was already, here in my area to be able to work on.
So you basically knew some people that were working in and around that industry, but you didn't have any experience with it.
I didn't have no experience, but I did know people that were already working in the industry.
So you leveraged your network, and then
Yes, sir.
you learned the trade, and then you built a business.
Yes, sir. Just like that.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
So what type of produce do you ship a lot? I mean, there's all kinds of different produce. What do you
I do a lot of broccoli, avocados, limes, lemons, berries, all berries, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries. What else do I do? Onions, carrots, a lot of carrots. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Peppers, yeah. Bell peppers, cilantro.
But in addition, we talked about this before we went live. In addition to the niche of produce that you specialize in, you also have a very heavy specialization in a specific lane or set of lanes. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because it's really interesting kind of how you've built your business. Not only did you specialize in produce, but you've even niched it down even further. Tell us a little bit about that.
I specialize in LTL, and the lane I really do a lot is McAllen, Texas to Florida. I've been able to make a lot of good contacts with customers in Florida that I work with on a daily basis. And my trucks already have their freight coming out of Florida back into Texas. So I just keep the ball moving, every day of the week into Florida.
Yeah. So the way that you've developed your relationship with your drivers, with your carriers, predominantly is the fact that you give them very good paying freight that comes from the McAllen area into Florida, where they've got dedicated customers that they can get out. So they get a good rate both ways, because as as most people know in the industry, Florida is kind of considered, if you're not moving produce, if you're not moving refrigerated, it's kind of a black hole, right?
Yes, sir, it is.
And the rates are really lousy out of there in a lot of cases, depending upon the equipment.
About $1.25 a mile.
Yeah, I remember
the right people.
I remember when I first started brokering, it was like 90 cents a mile.
Yeah.
Anywhere out of Florida was 90 cents a mile. It was brutal.
It's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
But no, I love the way you built that. I love, because not only did you focus on the customer side, you didn't just focus on going out and getting the customer and providing value there. You focused on the carrier side and how you could enhance and provide value there. So I think I love the fact that you've created this and thought the business out in such a way that you understand that both your two most important stakeholders in your business are your carriers and your customers. Yeah. So and one without the other is almost useless.
It is. It really is. And I've been using the same carriers repetitively for the past, 8-9 years, from when I started my own lane over there.
So here's a quick question that I think people could learn from. The bulk of your freight, okay, because you just mentioned you use the same carriers over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
How many carriers do you think you use that would represent 80% of your loads? Like, how many different carriers? Is it a dozen? Is it 50? Is it 100? I mean, how many different carriers? Yeah, roughly. I mean, if you had to take a guess.
Okay, well, each carrier that I use has about, anywhere from 3 to 6 trucks, and I load all their trucks. So I probably use about 6 different companies but they all have different. They all have 3 trucks, 4 trucks.
Yeah, but you have
6
6.
trucks.
So 6 different carriers are moving
Mhm.
over 80% of your loads.
Yes, sir.
So here's the cool thing, guys. This is what I want you to extract from this. This is the reason why I went down this wormhole. I promise we're going to get started on these 10 tips, okay? But the reason why I went down this wormhole is not only in order for you to build a highly successful freight broker, freight agency business, not only do you not need hundreds of customers, shippers, you really only need a small handful, right,
Yes.
of good customers. Not only that, but you don't need thousands of carriers either if you treat them right, if you build your business the right way. You just heard how Eloy told you, he's got a handful of carriers that control 80% of his freight. So he's not posting his loads to Load Board. He's not what you call a post and hope broker, right? Which is what you see a lot of, right? I'm sure that there's times when he might have to post a load.
Yeah,
and
I do. Once in a while.
But ultimately, he's built a real strong carrier base and a strong relationship. And he's provided enough value to those carriers that they're just giving him their trucks, whenever he needs them. So that's the type of relationships you want to build. All right. Anything you want to add to that before we jump into the tips?
No, sir. I'm good.
All right. Awesome. So we're going to share with you, Eloy's going to share with you 10 tips that freight brokers need to know about the produce niche. Now, as you guys know, the produce niche can be highly profitable, but like every niche, it's very nuanced and it can be very competitive. So you need to understand, I decided to put this training together because you need to understand these nuances because the produce industry is different than the flatbed industry, right? Or the steel industry. It's different than big time. It's different than building products. It's different than bottled beverages. It's different than, import export stuff, right? So why don't you take it from the top here, hit us with some of these tips. We'll break each one apart and we'll go from there.
Well, the number one tip I have right now that's very important is the temperature of the product you're hauling. That's like one of the biggest, most important things that you can do with produce because it does have shelf life. And if you run it at the wrong temperature, the receiver is going to reject it. So let's say you got asparagus, which is one of the, I call it live dynamite because if you run it, it's supposed to be run at 35. If you run it at 38, 39 degrees and it gets to the receiver hot, they're going to reject it and it's very expensive.
So what you have to understand, what the most glaringly obvious difference between produce and van freight or flatbed freight is the temperature control. So and here's the thing, right? Tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong, but every different produce has a different parameter for temperature. Some produce runs at 35. Some produce can run a little bit, a little bit warmer. Some, Tell us a little bit about that. You said asparagus has to run at 35, but for example, give us another one that you do quite often and it runs at a different temperature.
I do a lot of, sometimes they'll mix the produce. So, sometimes you got produce that runs at 45, but you got cilantro that you can run at 38 to 40 degrees. So then, you gotta run that at 40 degrees continuous because you gotta work for both, both temperatures on the truck.
Yeah, sometimes you have mixed loads.
You got mixed loads.
Yeah, and sometimes that can cause issues, right?
Yes,
so
sir.
So temperature is very, very important. Number one, you need to make sure that
pre-cool your truck, your trailer.
You need to make sure you understand the temperature. You need to make sure that the driver understands the temperature. You need to make sure that it's continuously running at that temperature. You need to make sure that reefer unit has been serviced and isn't going to have any issues. Right.
Yes,
so there's a whole different element there. So temperature is very, very important. That's number one. All right.
That's
number two.
Number two, you got to know the weight per box and per pallet of the product you are loading.
Yeah. Like every product, weight is always going to be a component, right? It doesn't matter if you're shipping steel or you're shipping bottled beverages or whatever. Weight is always going to be a concern and an issue and a variable that you have to manage. So in produce, tell us a little bit about how the weights are.
Produce gets pretty tricky.
Yeah.
Because you got limes that are like at 40 pounds a box, and sometimes you got let's say avocados are 25 pounds a box, tomatoes are 25 pounds a box. You just got different weight. And you always got to add that 1 extra pound just in case. I do it for the carton of the box and for the pallet, right? Because all that stuff weighs. And sometimes you got trucks that can only load 40,000 pounds worth of product. Sometimes you got trucks that can do 38,000 pounds. And you get lucky sometimes with trucks that can do 45,000 pounds, you know? So like with limes, a full load of limes, you're looking at 44,200 pounds. So not everybody can load a full load of limes. That's like one of the heaviest.
Yeah, because what you have to understand is that typical vans, the van trailers, and even the power units are lighter than refrigerated, because the refrigerated units have to be insulated, right? So they're built differently, right? So
yes, sir.
Just because you have a certain weight you can load on a van doesn't mean you can load that exact same weight on a reefer. So you need to be very particular. Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. Okay. Number 3.
Number 3, I got make sure you got your box and case count right when your driver is loading. So your driver has to make sure that whatever he is signing for, he needs to make sure that's what he has in his trailer, because once you get to the receiver and you're short on product, they're going to want to claim you those 20 boxes that are missing. You know, maybe he signed for 20 pallets, they only loaded 19 pallets. So they're going to want to bill you for that. I mean, you signed for 20 pallets. What happened to that one pallet, you know? So they always got to be on their tippy toes, making sure that whatever they're loading is whatever they're signing for is what's going on in their trailer.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, not just for the produce industry, because I think that's equally as important for almost any product, right, that you're shipping.
Yes,
because if the driver doesn't do a count, right, and they don't compare the count to what the bill says, to what the bill of lading says, and they show up at the other end and it doesn't match, there's going to be a claim.
There's going to be a claim. Yep.
There's going to be a claim.
And then you got to hold their money, and it turns into it's a back and forth battle.
Yeah. And the thing is this, as a broker, the hard part for you is you're not there when they're loading it or unloading it. So,
yes,
but you have to communicate effectively with your drivers to make sure that the case count and the piece count and all of that stuff is accurate. And if you find out there's any discrepancy, it's better to know when they're 20 miles away than it is when they're 1,500 miles away.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So you asking that extra question and validating it and making sure that those numbers are correct. This is where the difference between good brokers and average brokers and shitty brokers. Okay.
Yes,
these are the little things that make all the difference. Yep. Love it. All right, cool.
Yes, Number 4, I got make sure your driver pulps the product upon loading for the product temperature.
So explain that. Explain that if you would, because most people don't understand pulping.
All these things I learned as I went, So whenever a driver loads a load of avocados, and I'm saying avocados because it happened to me one time, and that's all it took, one time. So my guy got to the shipper, and they loaded a full load of avocados. He did not pulp them. When they got to the receiver, they were pulping at 47 degrees when they're supposed to be at 38 degrees, right? So the receiver, he received them because we're good friends, and he received it under protest. So what happened there is that my guy dropped the ball, and he didn't pulp the temperature. He had pulped them, we would have known he loaded them at 47 degrees and not at 38. But when he signed for it, he signed at 38 degrees.
Explain to them what pulping means. What's the procedure that the driver has to take in order to get that reading?
Pulping means it varies. It can be a laser pulp, or you can have it's like a thermometer that you just poke the product in, and it'll read the temperature that the product's actually at when you're loading it.
Yeah, so you want to know the temperature of the product, because if they're telling you it has to be at 38 degrees and it's at 48 degrees, that needs to either be noted up front so that they know that they're loading a product that's warm,
Yes, sir.
or not load the product,
Yep. Don't
right? I
load it.
mean,
Or
yeah,
wait till the
don't,
next day. They're gonna force cool it, you know?
right. And so, and that's going to save a lot of disappointment and everybody's end, not only the shipper, but the carrier, and a lot of aggravation in between. So that's a very important one when you're talking about produce. That's one that you know is one of those things that you just absolutely have to do. And if you don't do, you're just setting yourself up for failure.
Yep.
All
Pretty
right,
much.
cool. Number 5.
Number 5, it goes back to number 1. Number 5 is always make sure that your reefer is set at a continuous mode, not cycle.
So explain the difference between continuous and cycle. So as a driver has a reefer unit, right?
Mm-hmm.
They basically have the equivalent of a big air conditioning unit, right? A big refrigerated unit attached to their trailer. And there are settings on that. And I'm talking to people that are just very new to this, right? Making the assumption that they don't understand what a reefer is. Talk to us about the difference between cycle and continuous and what the difference makes.
Well, the difference between cycle and continuous is that it pretty much, I see it like as your refrigerator in your home. If you have your refrigerator set at 39 degrees, it's going to always be, you know, throwing out 39 degrees. So when it's continuously doing that, it keeps the product at the temperature you loaded it at.
Right.
You know? So if you're loading some, let's say berries, and you leave it at cycle, berries are supposed to be ran at 34 degrees, 33 to 34. It all depends on the customer. But if you put it at cycle, so when you do that, you're going to be having it at 34 cycle, but it's going to go up to 38, 39 degrees. And then when it turns back on, it'll go all the way down to 34. But then it'll go down from 34 down to, 32, 31, because it has to offset that difference.
Yep.
So when that happens, you can freeze the product.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, you got to understand, these are the differences between successfully moving the freight from point A to point B with no issues and no problems, and the shipper accepting it, versus having all kinds of issues. And the people that you hear that talk about produce and the number of claims and the difficulty and the challenges, it's because they don't understand these steps. If you follow these steps, the reason why I had Eloy on here today is because we have a lot of people in Freight Broker Bootcamp that want to pursue the produce niche, but they either get scared because of the a little bit more complexity than just a one pick, one drop van load, or they don't get scared enough and they go out there and they start moving freight and they start running into claims and issues.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. That's a big one.
That's the reason why I wanted to have him on today. All right, cool. So let's talk about number 6.
Number 6, and I'm staying a lot on the temperature side because it's one of the most important things.
Of course.
I got number 6 is make sure your driver is signing for the correct product and temperature that the bills state at. Yeah, you got to make sure. I mean, if your customer sends you, a pickup number, and that pickup number says you're picking up 380 boxes of 5x5 tomatoes, aroma tomatoes, extra large, and you go and sign in, your driver signs in and they load them the same amount of boxes, but they're not 5x5 tomatoes, they're great tomatoes, right? But your guy still signs for them and he takes off. And once he gets to, to the receiving end, they're going to tell you, hey, this is not what I ordered, So now you're stuck with a full load of the wrong product. And what are you going to do with a whole load of tomatoes, right?
Yeah, you got a problem.
Yeah, your customer is going to be mad at you and he's going to tell you, hey, now I got to find somewhere to put them at. Nobody wants to take them. Now you have your driver sitting there for 2 or 3 days waiting for your customer to find somewhere to store the product.
Which
so that's a big one.
That's a bad deal all around. You got to make sure that the drivers are getting the right product, because not all tomatoes are the same
The same.
tomatoes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's a difference in produce, just like
And
there's a
I
difference.
use tomato as an example because there's so many different types of tomatoes out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure. All right. No, I love that one. That's perfect. See, this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the nuances, the finer points, right? That's really what we're diving into here. All right. So number 7.
Number 7, since I do LTL, when mixing produce, make sure all product can run at the same temperature levels as you explained earlier, because you cannot mix some of this, like papayas. They'll throw out that gas that makes it warmer. So you can't load broccoli with papayas, because you're gonna ruin. First of all, broccoli has to be ran at 34 degrees. Papayas run at 48. So if you mix something like that, that ethylene gas is gonna make the crowns yellow, brown, and you're running it at, and then you're running papayas at something that's not supposed to be ran at a cold temperature. So you're gonna ruin both products. So whenever you're doing LTL, you need to make sure that whatever product you're mixing is running at the same temperature as the product next to it.
Yeah. So if you're running a full truckload of papayas, it's going to all run at the same temperature, right? And you're going to have a specific temperature for that. But if you're running an LTL load, like he explained to you, you have to make sure that those different products can run together. He explained to you the nuances there. Not all product can run on the same ship or on the same truck when it comes to when it comes to produce. Okay, it's not like mixing 2x4s and 2x6s. Those don't matter.
or rod irons or iron rods.
That stuff doesn't matter, right? When you're combining that stuff, but when you're combining produce, different types of produce, it makes a big difference because they emit different gases. They have to run at different temperatures. So I think that's important. Great. All right, number 8.
Number 8, rates in produce are very competitive. You don't want to be known as the cheapest guy out there.
Yeah. And what happens when you try to be the cheapest? Explain to people when you try to be the cheapest. What typically happens when you try to be the Walmart of produce guys?
What happens is that you got a lot of owner operators, and those owner operators are looking for the best rates out there, especially right now with the diesel being so high. When you bid for a load, you need to make sure you know what you're bidding, because if you bid too low, it's going to come around and bite you in the ass. Because let's say you bid $4,500 on a load and everybody else out there is paying $5,000, $4,800. So now you got to turn around and tell your customer, hey, I can't find a truck. I underbid. I can't find a truck. And you never want to do that to a customer because he already set the pricing per box when he's selling it. So now he has to turn around and try to resell basically the product he had already sold. That, or you're gonna have to bite the bullet and pay the extra $200-$300 to cover the load.
Yeah. So the biggest issue is you just won't cover the load.
That's the biggest issue,
right? And then the second to that, even if you do cover it at a higher rate, now you're making the shipper go out of his way. You're creating an inconvenience and an issue for him just to try to move the product. So you're wasting his time and energy that he could be focused on moving forward, right? So it has a tendency to erode that customer relationship as opposed to enhancing that relationship.
Not only that, you lose credibility with them. They're never going to come back to you if they really need to.
Yeah, for sure. Plus, one of the other things that I notice is, whenever you find a truck that's really cheap, right? There's usually a reason. Right?
Why it's cheap. Yes.
Yeah. Why is it so cheap? Is it because, the equipment is garbage and it hasn't been serviced properly? Is it because they're having some sort of safety issues or there's some sort of issue with getting loaded by other brokers? I mean, what's really going on? If you trying to hire the cheapest truck rarely ever ends up good. Yes. Now, you can't always pay the most expensive, but you can be a little bit more than
between.
You can be in between. That's the hard part I tell everybody about rating, right? Rating, it's very easy to be the most expensive. It's very easy to be the cheapest. The challenge is finding that sweet spot.
Yes.
Right? And that's obviously what Eloy's been able to do because he has done over $10 million worth of this type of business. So
Yes, sir.
And continues moving forward. So that's a great tip. All right, number 9.
Number nine is a big one too. Make sure your appointments are scheduled accordingly, especially with big retail stores like Walmart, or actually it's not Walmart, it's Sam's distribution centers.
Yep.
Publix, Kroger's. I mean, all these guys, if you don't schedule your appointment, accordingly or on time, you're going to be sitting out there for an extra day or two waiting to get unloaded.
Yeah, notice what he just said. What he just said was an extra day or two, not an extra hour or two.
Yeah, a day or two.
Okay. If you do not button up the appointments, if you do not touch all the bases on that, if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's when it comes to the appointments, especially at those large retailers, you're going to be in deep, right?
Yeah,
because number one, that truck is not going to do that for free.
No, not only
you're
that.
Either going to have to pay it out of your pocket, or you're going to have to get the shipper to cover the cost, which again, now you're going back to that shipper and it's your fault. And, they're going to have to come out of pocket. And a lot of times that's just not going to happen. So it's going to come out of your pocket.
Yep.
Okay. So
they might help you out, but they won't use you after that.
Yeah. Then you're done. Yeah. Cause they got to get the product there. Right. Otherwise
Yeah.
they face a bigger issue. So they may help you there, but chances are they're either going to, not give you freight for a while, or probably never give you freight again. So
especially Sam's. Sam's is one of the worst ones that you got to schedule, maybe 4 to 5 days in advance. And if you miss that appointment, now you got to reschedule. That takes a whole day just to reschedule. And then once you reschedule, they already have other appointments set. So they got to fit you in somewhere. So
yeah, they're working you in. Yes, exactly.
They're going to work you in, and it's a big mess.
Yep. Totally agree. Another good one, of course.
Shelf
Number
life.
10.
Number 10, make sure your driver has his load locks secured. You don't want those pallets tipping over, especially mangoes.
His load locks are secure. So explain that a little bit. In a reefers are a little bit different than a van sometimes, right? So, reefers are all metal. They have metal floors, metal sides, right? It's not wood.
Sir.
It's not wood like a van.
It's not wood.
Yeah. So you're not nailing pallets to the floor. You're not doing that sort of stuff. So there's load locks. So explain what that means for someone who's brand new.
Load locks, they go across from one wall to the other wall, and they secure the load in its place. I mean, sometimes you have to use 3 or 4 of them. I got some carriers that use straps. They've custom made their reefer to where they can just use straps to hold on to the pallets.
Right.
I mentioned mangos before because mangos come at 210 cases to one pallet. You can imagine that's like a 7.5 to 8 foot pallet.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that thing moves. You press the brakes or you make a sharp turn, and it can tip over. You don't want to get to your receiver with mangoes all over the floor. That's a big nightmare.
Yeah, that's the definition of a nightmare.
Yeah, that's a big nightmare.
Oh my gosh. All right. No, that's a good one. So you got to make sure that the product is secured, and make sure you're using load locks or straps to make sure that the pallets are secure, especially if you're talking about stuff like the mangoes you mentioned that could be 6 or 7 or 8 feet high. So no, those are great tips.
You're talking about $80,000 worth of mangoes. You want to treat them like a baby. You don't want to have them on the floor. Exactly.
All right, cool. Well, listen, is there anything else you want to share that's very nuanced or specific about the produce niche? I mean, I know a lot of people are concerned about it. Why don't we talk? I mean, we talked about the nuances and some of the major concerns. Talk a little bit about the industry as a whole. I mean, the produce industry is a huge industry.
It's right? Huge. Yes, sir.
It's a huge industry. What are the biggest states for produce? I know you specialize in Texas and Florida, but what are some of the biggest states besides Texas and Florida for produce?
I would say like the whole border. Mm-hmm. I would say California, Washington State. They have a lot of produce coming out of there. I know New Jersey, New York. They have apples out there.
Yep.
Like I said, Arizona, New Mexico's okay. Texas, of course, they have a bunch of Mexican produce coming through here. that's pretty much it that I know of. Georgia has a lot of peaches,
Mhm.
berries as well coming out of Georgia.
Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity in the
Corn.
produce. There's a lot of opportunity in the produce industry,
Yes,
right?
sir.
But it's only an opportunity if you understand the important steps to it, right? And again, you're not going to know, you're not going to be an expert day one, but it's something that you need to do your research. You need to do your due diligence. You need to make sure you follow your steps, and you need to make sure that you pay attention to these 10 tips in particular. And I'm sure there's a bunch of others that if we had more time, he would share. But listen, I want to thank you so much, my friend. This was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah. This is the second time Eloy's been on here. First time he kind of told his story of how he got started and Freight Broker Boot Camp and how he became an agent. And we've developed a great friendship over the years. Congrats on all your success. Truly appreciate you being here. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
My first boss used to call me the internet guy, because whenever he hired me, he asked me, have you ever, dispatched or anything? I said, no, I learned it off the internet. I bought a program and I went off telling him about Freight Broker Boot Camp, and he gave me a shot and I took it from there.
Yeah. And you parlayed that into a hell of a business, my friend. Congrats.
Yes,
and
sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. So listen, we are going to jump into some Q&A. But before we do that, if you're curious about becoming a freight broker or a freight agent, and you're trying to put the pieces together on YouTube and Google and all these different places, and they're just not all matching up, and you've got a lot of questions, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. We've trained over 10,000 students, been in business over a decade, and I offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. I can't make it any easier than that. Thank you so much. Truly appreciate you guys being here. Have an awesome day, and we'll talk next week. All right, cool. So for those of you that want to jump into some Q&A, all right, so I have a feeling we're going to have a ton of questions, my friend, but I am going to limit this because, number one, Eloy has a business to run. And I'm sure that he has voicemails and emails that he has to respond to right now, if I know anything about him. So we're going to try to keep this relatively short. So it's going to be a first come, first serve deal, right? People that the questions, we're going to jump into some questions, but we're going to be off here fairly quick, okay? Because we both have things to do, and I'm sure you guys do too. All right, so let's talk about this. Let me find a question. I'm going to try to find the most relevant questions. All right, so here's a question for Eloy. Do you have any clients outside of Texas? I mean, where are most of your shippers located?
I have a bunch of clients. Most of my clients are outside of Texas. I have a bunch in Florida, New Jersey, New York. The thing with produce is you can sit anywhere and sell it. I have guys, out in Georgia as well. I may have 2 or 3 out of here, out of Texas.
So most of your customers, are they retailers? Are they produce brokers? Are they growers? I mean, talk to us a little bit about that.
I got a mix of everything. I got growers, I got retailers, I got produce brokers. I mean, I pretty much, I got guys that, travel into Mexico. They go check the crop out and they just cross it into the US and sell it. So, nice. Yeah.
Cool. Good. All right. Okay. All right, so I'll answer this one really quick for Gertrude. What's the difference between a freight broker and a freight agent? Okay, so a freight broker is licensed by the FMCSA, right? So they have a freight broker authority or license, which requires you to jump through some hoops here a little bit. Like you got to get your freight broker bond, you got to get your BOC3. There's a few steps, but then you are authorized to broker freight in the United States. A freight agent is someone that works under a licensed freight broker, typically as an independent contractor. So Eloy is an independent contractor. So he's his own business owner, and he operates on a 1099 basis under another broker, right? So all brokered loads have to fall under a broker, but some companies have an agent business model. Some companies have more of a W-2 employee model. Eloy works as an agent. So Eloy's job is predominantly to find customers, and help manage freight for those customers from cradle to grave. And then his broker that he works under does a lot of the billing and the financial and provides some of the technology and the authority and insurance that it all runs under. All right. Anything you want to add to that, Eloy?
No, you pretty much nailed it.
And he lives on straight commission, so he gets a commission rate. What's your commission? What percentage do you get for commission?
I'm at 60%.
He gets 60% of the profit. So that means if there's just for easy math, $200 made in profit on a load, he paid a carrier $1,000, or a shipper paid him $1,000, he paid a carrier $800, $200 in gross profit. He would make $120 on that one shipment, right?
Yes,
so
sir.
a lot of loads in produce are high dollar value, right? So it's not uncommon for them to be $5, $6, even $8, $10,000 sometimes, right? And so, because it's a higher dollar value, you can also make higher dollar profit, right? In a lot of cases on those loads. So the percentage goes down, but the dollar value goes up. So it can be very attractive. So good question. Thank you. All right. I'm trying to find where I left off here. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Give me 1 second here, guys. So someone's asking, Cameron Harrell's asking, even if you have bulkheads, because you mentioned LTL, okay? With produce LTL, do bulkheads come into play? How does that work? Or is it, talk to us a little bit about that. Because I know with some refrigerated freight, right, when you have temperature control, they have bulkheads where they can divide the trailer out.
Yes.
Does that apply to produce or no?
Not really. A lot of customers don't want to take that risk. They'd rather just, buy the truck straight out and just have it ran at one temperature.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between running a bunch of frozen meat versus running produce, right?
Yes, big difference.
Big difference. Even though it goes on the same type of truck, there's a big difference in the type of freight.
Yes, sir.
This will be a hard one, but maybe you can try to hone in for Rico. On average, how much is a reefer truck paid per mile if you had a range? Because I know it varies a lot, but just to try to give some sort of feedback, or maybe the lane that you do, one of the lanes you do most often is McAllen to Florida. So pick a lane pick a McAllen to a point in Florida that you go to a lot. Like, where do you go? Orlando, Tampa?
I do a lot of Pompano and Miami.
Okay, so do Miami. So we're going to go McAllen to Miami. What are you typically paying a truck these days for?
Per mile, I'd say anywhere between $3 to $3.25 a mile.
And that's exclusive use though, right? That's the full truck.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
so
sir.
Yeah, so between $3 and $3.50 a mile for all miles. So McAllen to Miami, how many miles is that? I know you know it off the top of your head.
You're looking at 1,550 miles.
1,550 miles times a minimum of $3 a mile to the truck.
Yes, sir.
So, and of course, that's going to vary depending upon the lane. It's going to vary depending upon the seasonality. It's going to vary depending upon supply and demand. There's a lot of things that are going to determine that, but that should give you a little bit of a baseline.
Yes, sir. Especially right now where,
fuel's
like
up.
I said, it's very competitive. There's more trucks than produce right now, so everybody's trying to chop the rates down.
Yes. All right. Okay, here's a good. Oprah has a question. Can I book a load with a brokerage from another broker and resell it to my carrier company? Well, that would be called double brokering. So if you are a carrier and you accept a load from a broker, and then you take that load and you give it to your brokerage or give it to another carrier, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's what it sounds like to me, that would be considered double brokering. So if you're doing that without the shipper's knowledge, that's a bad deal. Most shippers are not going to want you to do that. And so if you're doing that without their knowledge, that's considered double brokering. And I would say no. If you're doing that with their knowledge and they're okay with it, then that would be completely up to you. But most shippers are going to say no to that.
Yeah, they're going to say no. It's too many phone calls there.
Yeah, too much of a daisy chain, losing control of the freight, too many issues. Double brokering has all kinds of issues. Where can we learn more? Well, if you want to learn how to become a freight broker or a freight agent, right, then you go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Trained over 10,000 students. We already shared that before. We have a 60-day, 100% money back guarantee. Now, this training is not specific to just the produce niche. We talk about how to broker, and the fundamentals of brokering are the same for produce versus steel versus. So some of those things he shared cross over into other niches, but there are some definite nuances specific to that niche. Now, I will tell you, here's something I wanted to share with you guys. If you guys, I have a produce shipper list of over 25,000 produce shippers that I've compiled. I put them together last year, so they're really fresh and very up-to-date information. If you guys want access to that produce shipper list, now it's not free, okay? It's worth well over $1,000, but I sell it for $498. If you guys want access to that produce shipper list, over 25,000 retailers, produce brokers, growers, all the produce industry. If you want to save a bunch of time and have access to that, hit me up in the comments with produce shipper list. And then I'll send you guys some information on where you guys can pick that up. But I'm probably going to limit it to, maybe 10 people or so. I don't publish that product out there into the market. I mean, as a matter of fact, I don't even sell it very much. I mean, I put it together for a specific product or a specific project that I was working on. But if you guys are looking for that type of a list, hit me up in the comments with produce shipper list, and I'll try to send you some information. But again, it's $498, and it's one of those deals where it's a downloadable list that you have total control over that list. So hit me up in the comments if you guys want that. That's specifically for you, Isaac, or anybody who's looking to get into the produce industry, because it sounds like that's part of what you were asking. Any tips for getting your first client? Eloy, talk to us. Tell us how you got your first client. Who was your first client?
My first client's out of McAllen. She retired, but I just cold called. That's all I did. Nothing special. I just cold called and introduced myself and tried to get my foot in the door and just take it from there.
All right. So that was your first client. Talk to us about how you got your last client, the last new client that you brought on. Right.
My last new client, after a couple of years of working, it's mainly word of mouth. That's what it is. You do good with other clients, and they'll pass your information around. You know.
Yeah, exactly. So when you first start, and the reason why I asked that, and I think that's the perfect segue, is when you first start, you have no reputation, you have no brand, you don't have a lot of experience, and nobody knows who you are, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to go out there and you got to turn over some stones.
You do.
And you got to go out and make some phone calls, and you got to do some face-to-face meetings, and you got to send some emails, and you got to do the sales outreach to develop those relationships. But after you establish yourself with those customers, right? Customers typically know customers. And a lot of times what will happen is with shippers, say, for example, he's moving produce for a retailer that buys produce. A lot of times they have customers or other connections that will also be interested in that. And so they'll make the introduction for you. So sometimes it becomes a lot of times it becomes warm referrals after you've established your business, but early on.
So many referrals.
Yeah. A lot of times at the beginning, it will become cold calls, right? But you can also tap your network for referrals early on too, especially if you know people in that specific niche. So if you have family or friends or connections that are in that niche, a lot of times you can do that.
Yep.
All right. A couple more questions and then we're going to go. Let's see what we got. I'm scrolling here. Just give me a minute. Okay. So Mahmoud asks, how can you start to open your own brokerage if you already have your own customers but work for XPO? Well, Mahmoud, I don't know what your role at XPO is, but if you're a W-2 employee, then obviously you're going to want to make sure that you don't have some sort of a non-compete, or you're going to have to be prepared for that if you're an employee of some sort of a non-compete. What you would go out and do is, number one, you want to get trained right? Number two, you got to go out and get your authority, which is through the FMCSA. You can just type Freight Broker Authority FMCSA, and it'll walk you through the steps. Are super simple. And then you break out on your own. And the same thing goes if you're already an agent for XPO, because I think they do have some companies that have an agent business model because they didn't. XPO basically grew through acquisition. They went out and acquired a bunch of companies, and I think they do have some agents under XPO. Then it's an even easier move, right? Because really at that point, all you really need to do is go out and get your Freight Broker Authority set up, make sure you've got your financial management set up, whether that be with factoring or whether that be with your own credit line or however you're going to handle that. And then you're off to the races. I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify it, but if you're already an agent, it's really not that tough. If you're not already an agent and you're an employee, it depends upon what type of role you're playing, and it depends upon the relationship you have with that customer or with that company. So I hope that helps. Okay, so here's a question. Tyrone asks, can an agent work under multiple brokers at the same time? The answer to that is yes, technically. Okay, you can work for multiple brokers at the same time. But realistically, it becomes very, very challenging. Let me explain to you why. If you are an agent for multiple brokers, number one, the shippers that you do business with, you're not going to want to intertwine those shippers with multiple brokers, meaning doing business with a shipper under ABC broker and doing business with that same shipper under XYZ brokerage, because at that point your shipper doesn't know who at any point you're representing, where the invoices are going to come from, or who to do business with, right? So that's a confusing issue. And the same thing goes with carriers. A lot of times, if you represent multiple brokers, carriers, it's very confusing to carriers and to shippers. So I always recommend that you don't do that. Now, some brokerages won't even allow it, right? They won't allow you to represent multiple brokers. But it is possible, but it's a lot more tricky. Did you have anything? I mean, have you ever had any experience with that, Eloy?
I've never had, for the same reason, just because of the invoices. My my customers, they'll tell me we don't have time to be sorting out invoices that come from one broker to another, from another brokerage. So I've always stuck to one.
Yeah, I think it creates a lot of confusion with both shippers and carriers, which creates a lot of complexity, which is unnecessary. So
yeah.
All right, we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up for today. Helpful in sharing how safely ship their. Okay, so here's a question. Reed Workman asks, are shippers generally helpful in sharing how to safely ship their produce, or do they mostly expect you to know already? So talk to us about that. If someone is new, will the shipper give all the details they need in order to ship, or will the broker or agent need to extract that information from the shipper?
They pretty much send you whenever they send you your confirmation, it pretty much tells you what temperature to run the product at, and what you'll be loading when you're loading. Like I said before, it'll give you the specific case count. Some customers don't give you the case count, they just give you the pickup numbers and the temp. That's why you always want to have everything in writing, especially on email. If they don't tell you what you're loading, I mean, they can't go back to you and say, hey, you loaded this product short, you didn't load this. I mean, that'll fall back to the shipper, who's actually loading you, because they never sent a specific case count.
Yeah, and if you want to be double careful, just ask them when you get it. If you notice there's no case count, and you notice there's no weight, and you notice there's some specifics that are missing, just reply back and ask the question. Yep. But I think in most cases, shippers do not want the product to get damaged or to cause a claim, right? That's a hassle for everybody. So they want to provide you a complete picture. If for some reason they don't send you a complete picture, then it's your responsibility, in my opinion, to ask those questions.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. It's our responsibility.
Yeah, it's your responsibility to ask those questions if it's not provided. But most of the time, the nuances associated with that are going to be provided by the shipper.
Yes.
All right, guys. Well, listen, thank you so much. And Eloy, thank you for being here. I know you're busy. I
Thank
hear
you.
the phone ringing. I hear the email dinging. I hear text going through. I hear all kinds of stuff. And that's okay because I know you're a busy man. But I do want to thank you for being here. And do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap up today?
No, I'm good.
All right, cool. Well, listen, we'll probably have you back on here at some point. We'll talk about something, whether something you've learned along the way. But for now, guys, if you're curious about becoming a freight broker, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. If you want access to that shipper list, that shipper produce list, right? So it's specifically produce oriented because that's what we're talking about today. Hit me up in the comments and I'll make sure we send you some information where you can check that out. And listen, everybody, thank you for being here. We do these lives every Monday at noon, so you can check these out. We do free trainings every week. Again, thank you, Eloy, for being here. Have an awesome day.
Thank you.
Have a
You
profitable week. Enjoy the time with your family here this summer playing baseball and with your daughter. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Eloy.
Yep.